Welcome to this month's Common Bonds Zoe Rogers Speaker Series, sponsored by KeyBank. I'm Mike DeCandido, one of the co-founders of Common Bonds, along with April Adams, who will talk with everybody at the end of our session. And we're really, really excited for a topic that I think we all agree is near and dear to many of our hearts in real-time society, which is the impact or the importance of DEI programs in education and in corporations and corporate responsibility around it. So just a couple of things. Many of you have been on already, but we ask you to keep your videos on if you'd like. You can turn them off, but we ask you to keep your audio off if you could to reduce distractions. We also want this to be interactive. So many of you are familiar with Zoom and the chat feature in Zoom. And if you have any questions, certainly ask the questions through the chat feature, and Karen, as she's moderating the discussion, will incorporate your questions appropriately. So on the bottom, four over from the left, you'll see the little chat feature. And if you hit that, you'll see the chats where you can ask your questions. So we encourage you to ask questions as we go along, and we'll go from there. So I'm thrilled with the group of experts that we brought on today, and just really excited that they're giving their valuable time for us. Let me go ahead and introduce them. The first person I'm pleased to introduce is Tamika Otis. Tamika is the Corporate Responsibility Officer and Community Relations Manager for the Capital Region and Central New York markets of KeyBank. And in her role, she's responsible for establishing and executing KeyBank's community engagement strategy and the deployment of charitable funding from KeyBank Foundation to local nonprofits. Tamika is a multipreneur, author, equity warrior, and atmosphere shifter. Her mission is to empower people to live their best lives. And among her numerous enterprises, she's had a hand in forming her most prized venture is the consulting firm she founded, KBOD Consulting Group, a full-service consulting agency that takes a holistic approach to organizational training and development, including DEIB, trauma-informed care, EQ, human-centered approach, and many more. Tamika has more than 20 years of experience in project management and the application of DEI and trauma-informed practices and procedures within the areas of government, corporate, and nonprofit entities. She specializes in identifying gaps that create inequities within organizations, and with the lens of equity and inclusion, transform them for the better. She also is the co-founder of the Black Women Give Foundation based in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. So Tamika, thank you for joining us. It's wonderful to have you.
Thank you for having me.
Next, we're thrilled that we have Dr. Barbara Logan Smith joining us. Dr. Barbara has over 25 years of experience as a dedicated teacher, administrator, and master trainer. And she's worked to build capacity in over 20,000 educators, business executives, and nonprofit leaders on a national scale, and to ensure the achievement of educational equity, excellence, and access to all children. With previous service as Vice President of the Efficacy Institute and Executive Director of Teach for America's Greater Delta region of Mississippi and Arkansas, Dr. Logan Smith currently works in the educational nonprofit sector as the Chief of Equity and Belonging at Teach for America nationally. Dr. Barbara is focused on illuminating brilliance. Her work centers on increasing equity, belonging, and grace in the world. And she is, Tamika lives in Syracuse, New York, and Dr. Barbara lives in Chicago, Illinois. So Dr. Barbara, pleasure to have you with us, and thank you for taking the time to educate all of us.
Honored to be here. It's my pleasure to learn alongside all of you.
We are thrilled that we will add to that 20,000 number. So finally, many of you who've been Common Bonds followers may recognize our moderator, Karen Spencer Kelly. She's been a wonderful supporter of Common Bonds over the 3 years that the organization has been going. Karen is an attorney with over 30 years of experience. She currently serves as senior counsel at Clark Hill. Her current work focuses on diversity and inclusion, auditing, conflict investigation and resolution, and conducting training in diversity and inclusion, unconscious bias, and belonging. Karen created the Diversity Inclusion 3.0 initiative to educate organizations and their employees about using diversity to create superior products and services, as well as improving the work culture and environment. Prior to her current practice, the scope of her work included practicing in the areas of civil litigation, government affairs, and municipal finance. She served as the chief counsel to the treasurer of Pennsylvania, drafting legal opinions for state and local government agencies and advising institutions, labor unions, universities, hospitals, and political candidates on a variety of exigent issues. Was also outside counsel to several private held companies, advising all aspects of their business. She earned her BA cum laude from Harvard. She received her JD from Villanova University, and she served on numerous nonprofit boards. And most notably, was the first female African-American president of the Worldwide Harvard Alumni Association. And she is a resident of the suburbs of Philadelphia. So Karen, welcome. It's wonderful to see you again. Yeah, I know you've been a panelist for us before, and couldn't think of anybody better to moderate the session today. So I'm going to hand it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Mike. Really nice to be back. And really wonderful to be with all of you for this incredibly important topic. The idea for this evening is to have an informal kind of free-flowing conversation between Tamika, Dr. Barbara, and I about various topics of our experience in our practice areas over the, if I add it together, close to 100 years of experience in DE&I. And I'll just say the title of this program again, The Importance of DEI Programs in Education and Corporate America. And that is a huge topic to me and hugely important right now. Over the weekend, there was an article in the Financial Times which said basically at its core that it was challenging the relevance of DE&I programming and that there was no, quote, proof that DE&I programs made any difference. I'll put a period there. And I feel like that means what I do and what I hope we do is redouble our effort. But I'd like just to turn to Tamika and Dr. Barbara and get your thoughts about this trend. And I promise we'll go on an upswing and more positive as we go on in this conversation. But I feel like it's something that's being brought out with this retrenching on the issue of DE&I, and I would like to hear what your perspectives are about that and what we could do about it. So Tamika, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Thank you. And thank you again for having me. I'm excited to be here with you today. So defunding diversity, right? It's a big effort across the country right now. And so my opinion is that when we're talking about diversity and inclusion, that can be a very kumbaya, very comfortable, very warm and fuzzy conversation, right? We live in America. It is not difficult to gather a group of diverse people, right? Okay, and we have to make you feel welcome. We can do that. I can make you feel welcome. We can do that. But then when we start talking about equity, right? Because equity means we're going out of our way to. Equity means we're not repairing systems. We are dismantling systems and rebuilding them. Equity is the hard part. Equity is the discomfort, right? And we're getting to that part because we've kind of kicked this diversity and inclusion down the street for long enough. And now it's really time to see some outcomes and to do the hard work. And now all of a sudden, all of these corporations that had all of these wonderful statements around George Floyd are the same exact corporations that are defunding diversity. Because to me, I feel as though now we're at the hard part. Now we're at the part where we have to build up new systems and we have to, make unprecedented decisions, right? And kind of go into this uncharted territory, and we have to do it together, and it's not going to feel comfortable, and it's not going to happen quick, and it's not going to be easy. And we're seeing all these corporations like, yep, had enough of this. I think we did the thing. We got a few diverse candidates. Everybody feels welcomed, so they say. And so, yeah, we're off of this now. And unfortunately, they're bailing before we get to the part where we really make the difference. because equity is the difficult part, and we should be funding DEI efforts more. But I think also we run into the risk of making DEI something we do rather than who we are when we talk about DEI programs or DEI initiatives, because DEI should be woven into the very fabric of your organization or your corporation. There should not be just one person or one department that is executing on DEI initiatives. So now we are at the space where we need to transition from DEI being something that we do to DEI being who we are as individuals, as corporations, as schools.
Great, thanks, Tamika. Dr. Barbara, how about your thoughts on this?
Very well said, Tamika. So much of what you said aligns to what I'm thinking. And I think that I had a conversation with a group of folks. I'm on a board for an education nonprofit that is centered on helping students to read through tutoring. And one of the things that they invited me to do was to help center them in the READY agreements, racial equity, diversity, inclusion agreements. And one of the things that we said, which is so aligned with what you were just describing, Tamika, is I think you think we're just going to check this off. Let's say we did that thing at the beginning in the first 15 minutes, and then let's check it off. And the actual invitation is to get checked in. Actually, the actual invitation is to get really centered on the idea that these agreements are not a set of things to pick one of and then move on about your business, because that's a process, right? When you have a lot of time, pick the one that you're holding most close. No, actually, all these things work together. Investigating who has advantage and who doesn't is a thing we're going to do all the way through. Accepting and expecting non-closure is not the invitation to never get to the work Tamika was just describing. It is the recognition that the systems we are up against are 500 years old. And so dismantling it is not something you do in a day or in a 1-hour meeting. It is a body of work that you have to get checked all the way into and stay with. And so when we're talking about this idea that we've not yet seen the manifestations, we've not yet been able to tell the story that this is leading to the changes that we want, I have two thoughts to that. One, how do you know? Who have you talked to? Because data, when you're just looking at the numbers, is only a piece of the story. Where's the conversation, the qualitative part of the story that helps you understand how lived experiences are or are not shifting? That's one thought. And two, did you think you would fix all that has been wrong for decades, for years, for hundreds of years in a single moment? That's not how this works. And so part of what we also have to be paying attention to is having the same kind of longevity for shifting the system that we had in building and holding and maintaining the system as it is. We have been seeing the kind of inequity that we see right now for generations. We're not going to change it in a single cycle. In the time since George Floyd was murdered, we had a lot of promises and commitments. We've actually not had the same kind of time for those things to try to be different, as we're now responding that, like, no, in 3 years that should have been solved for. That's not how any of this works. And to your point, Karen, when they're even chronicling all the way back, part of my question is, and what is the nature and integrity of the thing that you were saying didn't work? Were you really fully invested in doing that? Or is that something you wrote down in a really nice binder and passed out to everybody and never actually lived into? So I have the question of, how do you know that it isn't working? What is the full data set that you're using? Is it qualitative and quantitative? I have the question of, to what degree are you expecting this thing to shift and turn around in an instant? And then I have a question about focus, fidelity, and rigor, because in the places where focus, fidelity, and rigor are real and parts of the system, and when you're doing the work the way that Tamika was just describing it, there is real impact and real influence, and things are shifting in ways that are notable, quantitatively, qualifiably, and in terms of the outcomes that the business is looking for. Research report after research report also says that when you do DEI for real, you actually get all kinds of benefits to the outcomes and bottom line that the organization was pursuing in the first place. So that's how I think about that.
Great. Dr. Barber, if I can circle back just for 1 second on what you were just talking about, the multiple F's that you were focusing on there, would you mind repeating that for us and telling us a little bit more about that? Because One of the questions that's come up in the chat is, what do successful equity practices look like in the workplace? And I kind of heard a connection between what you're saying and that question. So can you tell us just a little bit more about that? I'm going to just insert one more thing. One of the missions of our meeting tonight is to give people information that they can take away and do things with. So perhaps what you're going to describe for us is something we can actually implement in our world. So I'm going to slow you down a little bit, take you back, and ask you if you wouldn't mind again. Thank you.
Yes. The other thing that you're asking me to do, Karen, is to listen to myself. So I'm like, what did I say? But I think I got it. So one of the things that I think, and I'm hearing the request for tangible. So one of the things that I think is really important, particularly when you're getting away from the traditional metrics. So traditional metrics, what do you pay attention to? You pay attention to things like, what is your actual diversity ratio? What does representation look like in your organization? So people often will say things like, when you compare people of color or BIPOC folks, Black, Indigenous people of color against white folks, then what you see is this kind of breakdown. And that's important. You should know that. But we push ourselves to also be asking the question, and what is this group called people of color? How many Black people are you actually talking about? And when you tell me that you're talking about people who identify as AANHPI, Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, who are you talking about in that? Because that is a group of like more than 20 groups of people. Are you talking about Chinese folks? Are you talking about Hmong folks? Are you talking about, who are you talking about? How do you actually break those numbers down even further to understand who your actual constituents are, who's really in your representation? So that's one set of metrics you can look at, who's here. And then once you've said this is who's here, and I understand how that ratio breaks down from group to group and across groups, then the question becomes, well, where are they in the organizational structure? Karen, in our conversation when we met, you talked about, you've got great diversity, but it's all sitting in one band in your organization, and it's all the folks in maintenance, which, you know, cool, but also there's more to do to actually make sure that you're thoughtful about, and who's in leadership, and who's supervising whom, and who's in your pipeline that is actually being developed. So part of it is like, what is the representation? And then it's like, what's the span and spread of that look like across the organization? And what are you doing in real time to shift those numbers to create greater diversity, to create greater access and opportunity? This comes back to what Tamika was describing about equity being the hard work. When we are having conversations about merit and equality, what we sometimes miss is the known disadvantages that are baked in for groups of color. So what are you building in? What kinds of equitable interventions are you creating to help folks get access to realms and rankings in leadership in your organization that hadn't previously been available to them? Or when you look across the band and everybody looks like one archetype of leadership, what are you doing to break up that consistent reality? That pattern is baked into your system. How do you unbake it? Or as Tamika said, how do you dismantle the system and structure as it currently exists so that more folks have access? So that's one set of things that you can pay attention to. And then to be mindful, right? When you got an organization that is in multiple places and you tell the story of diversity, as we were doing, we were telling the overarching story of diversity, but that wasn't helping people see, but on this one team, there's not a lot of diversity, even though there's diversity in the whole. So pay attention to it overall, pay attention to it in the breakout of different groups of identity bands, pay attention to it in terms of roles and opportunities for leadership, and be paying attention to it in terms of, and is this the same story across regional teams? Is this the same story across the full experience of your organization? And you can also pay attention to pay, and is the compensation equitable? You can pay attention to all of that. We call those the traditional metrics of diversity, equity, and inclusion. We pay attention to all of that. But the other thing that we discovered when we did an equity assessment in our own organization, and we did this with the help of the Racial Equity Institute, we discovered that very often, because for 10 years, we were actively working to shift our representation. And we've done that. You look at our organization for the last, actually 10 to 15 years now, we have a fundamentally different story of who's in our organization. We've got the same amount of folks of color in leadership as anybody else, including Black folks. We've got folks throughout who we're inviting into the core to teach our students. We've done a bunch of work around diversifying that. So we've done that work and we were doing really well on that. But people were still saying something's off. These numbers are moving in the right direction, but something is off. And what we discovered was we weren't paying attention to lived experiences. So it is possible to have tons of representation, but to have an old archetype that says to be successful, you need to look like this, dress like this, talk like this, be like this, have this kind of identity in this place. And so we started doing a bunch of work to understand what are people's lived experiences. Some of that we gathered from surveys that we did, like Great Places to Work surveys or Culture Amp. Some of that we did through focus groups and just gathering groups of people together to tell us what is going on in your experience. And some of that we did by doing some triangulation of existing documents and data that we had. And some of that we did by just slowing down and going to our resource groups and saying, hey, you all have been gathered together in affinity. What can you tell us about what your experience has been as a particular group of people with a particular set of identities? And all of that led us to understand that people were having, there was a group that was having a predictably lesser experience. And we wanted to do something about that because if you understand the racial arrangement in this country, Karen, I promise I'll say this and then I'll stop because I could talk about this all night, obviously. But if you understand the racial arrangement in this country, it really doesn't matter what field or sector you look in. You could look at economics, you could look at criminal justice, you could look at education, you could look at housing access. You will find that in most of these sectors and systems, there is a predictable kind of experience where if somebody is having a lesser experience, it is people of color. And in that group of people of color, if somebody is having a lesser experience, it is Black and Indigenous people. And so what we found in our own data was just that. We were doing tons of things. We had made a ton of progress and still people were having an experience that didn't work. And it wasn't until we decided to be in conversation with people and to start interrogating lived experiences that we got full access to that. So those are some of the things that I would offer, Karen. I think I answered your question.
You did. Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Barber. Tamika, there was an awful lot there that Dr. Barber opened up for us. Is there, would you like to comment on any particular part of that? Or I'd certainly be happy to hear your particular thoughts about this idea of what do successful equity practices look like in the workplace?
Well, everything that she said, it's just that, I think that was a beautiful job. But I think talking about lived experiences is really, really important because we all have different experiences, yet our experiences mold our perception and our perspectives, right? So you could be doing something and I'm like, what in the world is that person doing? Like, why does she act like that? Why? And then I learn about your lived experience. And even if I'm still not in agreement with the thing you're doing, I have a better understanding of why, right? So then that activates my compassion muscle, right? So I can have more compassion for you. One of the things that I wrote down was, when we're talking about learning about who's in your organization, my first question is, who are your decision makers? Please don't talk to me about the diversity of your frontline staff, but your entire board is non-diverse. Everybody who's making decisions are not diverse. They don't share the lived experience of your staff, nor the people that you serve. How is it possible that you can be equitable? And so I would agree with what Dr. Barber said. We have to have conversations. We have to be willing to be uncomfortable. We have to hear from the people within our organizations. And what you'll find is that we have such a beautiful diversity that's much further than color and much further than gender. It's a diversity of experience. It's a diversity of thought processes that when they come together, make such a beautiful organization. But again, this equity talk, it is the hard part. And we're watching in real time as corporations, government offices, huge entities are bailing out because this equitable thing. Also, I think some people feel like if certain people who haven't had equity before get it, then that means you're taking my equity away. It means you're taking something away from me to give to other people. And that's not how equity works. And then also we have these conversations around equality, which is great, right? But sometimes being equal across the board can be the most inequitable thing that you do, because it's not acknowledging that certain people have different starting lines, right? And not only different starting lines, but ever moving finishing lines. It's like we get to the finish, oh, I still got to do that thing, right? And that's our experience. And when you learn the experience of people and the frustration and the historical context to how we got here, then to me, it helps to, again, activate our compassion muscle, to activate our empathy. I don't have to agree with your stance, but I kind of get it. Like if that was my experience, I might feel the same way too. And so it just fosters a sense of belonging. It fosters the ability to be able to have a conversation, and we don't have to be in argument when we're in disagreement, right? We don't all think the same, but I appreciate differing opinions. I appreciate different perspectives because that stretches me. And I might not agree with you in the long run, but it's really, really important. So for me, and then also when I go into organizations and we're talking about equity and inclusion, the first thing I want to see is your budget. Where's the line item that supports equity and inclusion? And when I don't see that, when I don't see a line item, especially for training, training is so important in this space. All of the training, the modules that you do, but I'm also a huge proponent of in-person training, interactive. Let me feel your energy. Let me talk to you. Let's have breakouts. Those things are really important. If I go into an organization and there is absolutely no money allocated towards this, then is it really important to you? And if you're not measuring outcomes, it doesn't matter to you. So it goes back to the whole, we said we did the thing, we did that thing. We listened to the people, check that. We hired some diverse folks, check that. Even got a diverse board member, one of 12, but we got that. And so we're good. But that is just the starting point, right? That is not fostering equity. Equity is going to be difficult. So I would also say, know your strengths, right? If you know that there's no one in your organization that can really be a genuine representation of equity, then bring in somebody who can, right? Sometimes we try and do things that we're not equipped for, and it's okay, but there are plenty of DEI subject matter experts and practitioners who what they do, their passion is to come into your organization and help to make it better. So be open to having different people to come in and to foster this sense of equity, inclusion, and belonging in your organization.
I couldn't agree with you more, Tamika, on that last point. What I have found in my personal experience challenging is I could start working with an organization and have leadership that is committed to equity and belonging and diversity. And and I explain when I come into any organization, I've got to have the buy-in 100% of leadership. They have to be on board, and they have to be visible, and they have to be involved with this continuously so that people understand that this is important. I mean, if Sheila, the big boss, is behind this, then people will take it more seriously. And if not, I think there's automatically a problem there. But what I found sometimes is when the leadership changes or moves, I find out just how really uncommitted people are to equity and inclusion. And I try to, and this is just a frustration point of mine, I try to educate and train and keep topics in front of them and what's topical right now, and have I couldn't agree with you more. I think that these sessions, the in-person sessions, are really critically important, because I think people have to understand that it's a person who's coming to explain this to them and to share their lived experience. And that brings it home differently. Just really quickly, there's one client that I have, and I just do a lot of training for them. So they all just know me as the diversity lady. They don't even necessarily know my name, but I'll be walking down the hall and they go, there goes the diversity lady. And someone said, isn't that insulting? I said, no, I want them to see me and think diversity, because they need to be thinking diversity, equity, and inclusion all the time. More times than I can say. There would be hiring decisions, and I could have just had a conversation with all the managers about the importance of diversity, and actually, unfortunately, or whatever, we have to, plant where we're, start where we're planting. But I had a group of people who were not diverse at all. And that was the first thing we had to address. And so I talked to the managers, we need diversity in the hiring process. Again and again and again, a manager would propose a particular person who looks just like the manager and say, we'll just hire this person this time. And next time we'll go with the diverse. We hear you, Karen. We understand it's important, but just this time we're going to hire my cousin Fred. And it repeats. So it's like the effort to keep diversity in front of people's decision-making processes has to be continuous. And it has to be, like you said, Tamika, in the fabric of how the organization is functioning. And that's changing the culture, and changing the culture necessarily, I believe, takes time. Yeah. It takes time, and it takes a real commitment on the part of who comes in to make this work happen. Because it's not, we have a terrible situation like the murder of George Floyd, and you would think that things would, quote, just change, and they don't. It's not what people default to. It's not what they go to. It's a matter of re-educating. And like you said, Dr. Barber, sort of deconstructing hundreds of years of stuff to allow a new structure to be created. It's really challenging. I mean, I'm saying the obvious, I know. But it's, and that's why I'm so impressed that Teach for America, when you're saying that you've had the ability to diversify your board and your executive staff and your teachers. And I mean, I'm so impressed by that. I can't tell you. And then you say, that's not enough. That's just the beginning. Now we get to the hard work. So it really is challenging. Like the real life aspect of this requires a whole lot of work, which is what I just raise it, and I'm sort of saying the obvious. But let me ask both of you if you would just think about your experience, your DE&I experience, and can you tell us what was the most challenging DE&I experience that you had in your career, whether it was with an individual or with implementing a program or with an institution? Just anecdotally, can you tell us like a little bit about what your experience has been? What was the most difficult thing that you encountered? And I will defer to you for a minute, and then
I see Dr. Barber laughing too. It's like, where do you want me to start?
Yeah, no, how
Right.
about, I know you can pick.
No, but I do have one, because several experiences, but this is difficult work, right? So I think it's all challenging in some way, shape, or form. But I would say that my start in DEI was before that was even coined a term. I didn't even know that what I was doing was enforcing equity and inclusion and belonging. I was director for the Job Corps program here in upstate New York for 10 years. And most of my students were from the inner city. Most of my students were Black and brown boys and girls between 16 and 24. Most of them had tumultuous family situations, maybe had experience, with the law. And what was happening was they were coming into my office, and because I shared a lot of their lived experience, we connected, we bonded, there was a trust there. I knew how to speak with them and speak with their families and make sure everything is right. And then they'd be so excited to go to Job Corps and so ready and so determined. They would get there, and within a week or two, they were on the bus back home. And it kept happening, and it kept happening. And I'm like, I know that I'm doing good work to prepare these young people. What is happening? And what was happening was that these young Black and brown girls from the inner city were going to centers in rural areas with almost 98% white staff that did not share their lived experience, that were far removed from the issues and barriers that they experienced. And it was just a clash. And so once I realized that, I made it my mission to go in and train Job Corps staff. And the first thing that we trained on was trauma, because most of our students were arriving to Job Corps centers riddled with trauma. And I think it's really difficult to really do this work effectively without touching on trauma, because so many of us, no matter your skin color or your experience, especially now with COVID, have experienced trauma, and it does affect the way that we show up. It does affect our behaviors. It does affect a lot of things. So for me, it was very challenging to get a system that had been around since 1964 that decided, hey kids, this is your last shot. So either come here and put up with it or go home. That was not equitable, right? And so for me, it was difficult, but it was work that was so necessary. And once we started to do that work, we saw our retention rating increase by 30% in 4 months, right? So it can start to happen quickly, but it was about awareness for our students about where they were going, and especially awareness to the staff about who they were receiving and how to, in an equitable way, in an inclusive way, receive them and support them and serve them. And it was challenging because it took a lot to try and get it right. We failed fast and recovered quick. Okay, that didn't work. Okay, this didn't work. And then also there were staff members on Job Corps sites that had been there for 30 years. Right. So we kind of needed to change the face, and people were like, hey, I've been here for 20 years. I'm retiring here. You're going to have to push me out of here. So sometimes diversifying your staff isn't as easy as we say, because there might not be openings and people aren't going anywhere. So are we creating positions? You know, what's happening? So for me, I think seeing how engaging and equitable and inclusive practices in the Job Corps world, how it really helped to maximize success and outcomes, then I just took that with everything that I did going forward. But for me, I would say that was one of the most challenging, but also one of the most rewarding parts in this work.
Great, thanks, Tamika. Dr. Barbara, do you have an example to share with us?
I, much like my brand new friend Tamika, am like, which one of the ones should y'all heard in the bio, right? Like, I was the executive director for the Greater Delta, which includes Mississippi and Arkansas. My entire family on my maternal side are of and from Mississippi. My grandparents were sharecroppers. My mama picked cotton. We are not talking about my ancestors I cannot name. We are talking about my grandma and my grandfather. And this is a family that had to like steal away from plantation after plantation in the middle of the night because of how not just inequitable, but egregious the practices were. My great grandfather was killed by the Klan, and this is where I went to work for 7 years. And so it is in my DNA that I was making a choice that was going to be complicated for me. It is in my complete understanding that, like, while my family was part of the group that migrated north, there is no like lack of racism and problems in the way that the North was treating people, but it was different and visceral in a different way for my family in Mississippi. And so decades later, I show up in this place to lead this work of really being oriented around the idea that our kids are brilliant, period, full stop. Not some of them, not some of the time, not if they got the right zip codes, genetic codes, bank codes. No, all of our babies are brilliant, period, full stop. And when they are not shining as such, it is because of grown folk and things that we have put in the system that are problematic. And if we bust up the system, then their brightness, right, can be revealed because what's blocking it gets out the way. I say all of that, Karen, as preamble to there were times and conversations that I'd find myself in where I could close my eyes and pretend my grandmother was telling me a story about her life, except it was real time right now. Right? It was real time right now in terms of people not believing that because of the melanin in our skin, our babies could learn. That right now, real time, there were experiences where people just could not believe that because these families didn't have money, because the intersections between identity and social economics is real. Though, even in those cases, you'll find that money is not a predictor that you get to outrun inequities, right? But like we were finding that a lot of the work was complicated because folks had like nestled into a set of expectations that like, this is just how it's going to be. And part of what I had to do for myself was remember that the people I was encountering were subject to the exact same system that I understand is problematic. I was falling into the trap of labeling the people as the problem. They're the problem. They don't believe in our kids. They're the problem. They need to, no, all of these people that I was encountering have been subject to the exact same system that I know to be blocking the brilliance of our kids. The problem is the system blocks the brilliance of everybody. Tamika has said several different times that something in this work is about compassion and that it's about empathy. And the reality is anybody who's been cut off from their compassion, anybody who's been cut off from their empathy, whether it's because they've been advantaged or because they've been disadvantaged, is not fully accessing their humanity. And anybody who is not fully accessing their humanity is going to show up weird to me because I believe in the humanity and the brilliance of everybody. And so how do I not lose sight of the fact that what is really wrong is not that people are terrible, horrible, no good people. What is really wrong is that the systems and the circumstances we have created for people create this. And the more that I could remember that, Karen, the better able I was to help people get the stuff out of the way. But the more I got centered in, nope, they're just terrible, horrible, no good people. And I hate them and I should hate them. Everybody else should hate them. Like all the energy I put towards that interrupted my ability to actually serve my kids. It interrupted my ability to serve my teachers. It interrupted my ability to actually help the place shift into what I truly still believe is possible, despite the fact that I've never, ever seen it in my lifetime. I still believe that it is possible to create a world where we stop creating advantage and disadvantage and pretending that we're not. I still believe it's possible to create a world where equity is in play until we can actually have a real conversation about equality. I still believe that it is possible to create a world where we unleash the brilliance of our people to take down and tackle anything and everything that has been getting in our way. But when I couldn't remember that, Karen, I couldn't really work for it. And that's what I would offer. It's been an ongoing struggle with me to remember that the systems get in everybody's way. Even if the way that they're showing up makes me focus more on the person, ad hominem is never going to get me to the place where I'm actually dealing with the system and the system's blocking it all for everybody. I'm going to throw some more stuff in the chat that is also more of the stuff that we did for folks who are still like, but the tangible stuff though. So that's my answer though to your question.
No, thank you. Thank you. What I'm going to do is shift gears a little bit and go to one of the questions in the chat. It is, have you found that managers who are people of color are more likely to respect the idea of diversification? Tamika, what do you think?
I think overall from my experience has been yes, right? And I think there's all kinds of biases, and one of them is called affinity bias. And I'm guilty of it myself. And affinity bias says that you prefer to be around people who look like you, who share your lived experience, who you can relate to, who you can be your authentic self with. And so yes, if you're a manager who is a person of color, I think it's not unreasonable that you want to bring in diverse people, right? And so even with that thought, then we have to also think that about our brothers and sisters who are not diverse, right? That they also have affinity bias. I'm guilty of it. They're guilty of it. That the thing is to be aware of it and to do something different. So yes, but then I also have, managers who are not diverse, who are all gung-ho for diversity. And then it happens and they're like, whoa, because we didn't do the work to receive the diverse, right? The diverse candidates. And then they get there and they're like, this is what, they're like deer in headlights as well.
Right. Well, it's interesting, that idea that there needs to be education in every sphere of this experience, from those who are coming, those who are receiving, those who are participating, those who are planning. Again, back to this idea of DE&I and belonging being in the fabric of the organization, so that it's something that we're continuously, if not immediately connected to, returning to and bringing along as part of what's being considered here. Or if something looks like it's not working, it's sort of saying, well, why isn't this working? Oh, we didn't prepare people. We didn't teach. We didn't allow them to learn or give them the tools. I mean, so often I found that that's been a problem, that people simply, they don't want to have the conversation because they don't have the tools to have the conversation. And they don't even know how to ask to get the tools to have the conversation. So we're just not going to talk about it. And we were talking earlier about this idea of having to have conversation, that's really necessary to move the needle, to change culture, to improve everything. That's really necessary. So I try to get people out of that fear space of, I'm going to say something wrong, I'm going to do something wrong, I don't know, with education. And part of that is reach for your empathy, reach for your compassion, reach for the things that we all can have inside of us that allow us to have these conversations, so that if someone says something that's marginally wrong or way out wrong, it's, I hear you, could you not say this, or could we talk about it this way, or could we, so sort of saying that we're all good people coming from good places trying to make something that's challenging work, because it is challenging. It's all challenging. Dr. Barbara, I didn't mean to cut you off there, but what is your
No.
experience been?
No, I so much of what you all are saying is resonating. I think a couple of different things. Where you are right now, Karen, makes me think of two parts of our work. One, we ask ourselves the question all the time. So we've diversified. It's important. Representation matters. Don't hear me saying that it doesn't. And the other phrase that I learned in undergraduate psych class is necessary and insufficient. It is necessary to diversify, and it is insufficient. If you don't change the context, if you don't create the conditions, then you just have a bunch of people arriving who are still expected to operate as if they were somebody completely outside of their own identity. And so that part, how do you create the context? How are you creating the conditions for everybody to thrive here? Well, that requires equity, belonging, and grace, which we're literally leading a series right now for over 200 folks in our org called Leading with Equity, Belonging, and Grace. And so the conversation is about, what does it look like to recognize that people are going to need different things to thrive here? The systems and structures that you've had for manager development probably aren't going to work for all the people that you've invited in now, because they were designed for a particular set of people, because usually it's a monolithic identity that's been in that spot. So how do you design what I need as a Black woman walking into your organization? How do you design something that is multifaceted and considers all the diversity and all the different lines of identity that you brought in? How do you think through intersectionality as you're designing those things? Because I'm not one thing, I'm several different things. How do you account for that in the way that you're designing it? Not because you have to design for every single snowflake, but because if you actually haven't encountered and considered different people need different things, and you design something that's one fits all, and nothing is one size fits all. It's just not. Ask me about pantyhose. We can have a long conversation. It's not how it works. That said, the other thing that we talk a lot about is belonging. How do you create, now that we've got the diverse representation and we're considering equity, how am I getting people what they need to be able to make a contribution that matters to them and to the org? Then the conversation becomes, well, and how do we create the experience where people feel like not only are they in the room, they deserve to be here, and we're happy they're here because of their different identities, because of their different experiences, because they're going to bring something to the table and to the conversation that would be absent without them, and we've made them feel like we want them here. I show up better in places where I think people like me and are going to be nice to me. How are we creating that experience for folks? And then to the point that you were making at the end of your remarks just then, Karen, how are we creating grace so that real human beings can show up? Because I promise you, I am going to accidentally say he or she, even though I mean to say all of it. Right? He, she, non-binary, like I mean to say all of it, but I'm so conditioned to not think and slow down. I'm going to say something. I'm going to use the phrase crazy. I should not. It's entirely ableist language. I should no longer be saying that because it interrupts the belonging of somebody sitting at the table. But I'm still learning and I'm still in development. Can we create enough space for that? Now, grace is not a blank check to say and do whatever. And that is how it has sometimes been used. I talk to folks about how do we operate with love and rigor. You will be called out if you are doing something that you're not supposed to do, but not called out as in get out, get kicked off the island, called in to account for the thing that you did that created harm. You might not have intended to. My intentions are always so pure, but it doesn't mean my impact is. So how do we get clear about the fact that there is grace, there is room for you to mess up as long as you take the space to restore? Tamika, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to say, I realized I had an impact. Can you help me figure out what it looks like to restore? Now, that question is important because it recognizes I don't know what Tamika needs to be right with me again. I can't presume that what I did with Karen last week is going to work for her. Well, the last time a Black lady was mad at me, I said, how come that ain't? She's not the same person. It's not the same experience. And so grace comes with recognition of my humanity, space for my humanity, but it also comes with an expectation of accountability to restore and make right according to the person that I've erred against. And so I think in a world where those things are available, then we can start to create the shift that we're looking for and end up with the results that we're truly after.
That's wonderful. Thank you. I was actually going to ask you to speak a little bit about the idea of grace, because that's it's such a beautiful word, and sort of conceptually what it brings to how it changes perception, at least from my point of view, making it so much more compassionate and understanding. But this idea of accountability, grace has its limits. There has to be accountability there. That's wonderful, because that's where the education piece can come in, and the change can actually happen. So like, okay, fine, we're going to allow for mistakes. We're going to allow for the missteps, but we all agree there needs to be some change too. And then the individual has to accept that and then make that change. But again, it's a big cultural change. It's a big difference. Mike, we are 8 minutes to go. Shall we? I think that if I introduce another topic, we might go over. Did you have some closing things that you wanted us to address, or?
We'll let April close.
Great.
She's on it. She certainly can close. Yep.
Yes. Hi. Wow. So I don't want to interrupt your closing thoughts. Tamika or Dr. Barbara, did you have any closing thoughts, closing remarks? I don't want to interrupt that.
I don't have a lot. I mean, again, like Dr. Barbara said, we could talk about this for like a week straight, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this is a topic that we can talk about for a long time. But what I will say is the importance of forums like this, right? The importance of bringing people together, diverse people with diverse experiences, to have this conversation, to hear different perspectives from different people, and then to have the ability to reach out to the people that, you're here with. I think it's really important. We talked a lot about the importance of conversation and connecting and bringing back the humanity, not just to our work, but to our world, right? I think a lot of times we live in an environment where it's like, you have to be like a robot. I worked for a company, and a friend of mine, a Black man, came to me and was like, I got this email and it doesn't feel right. Does it feel off to you? And the email said, please join us for your new leader assimilation. And I said, assimilation? It doesn't say assimilation. No, it doesn't. And then he showed me the email and it did. And I could feel my blood boil, because especially to send that to a Black man in a nearly all white organization, you're telling him, in order to come here, you have to assimilate to our culture. You have to become who we are. And he's never going to be that, right? So the words that we choose, I don't think their intention was for him to, or me to, receive it that way. But, when we're talking about inclusion, that is not assimilation. Inclusion is not you saying you have to come in and be exactly like us. No, I say all the time, I didn't come to assimilate to your culture. I came to cultivate it, to add value to it and to nourish it, but I'm never going to assimilate, and you shouldn't want me to. Another piece is that culture eats strategy for lunch. If we're only talking about our strategies, our policies, our procedures, and we're not paying very, very close attention to the culture of our organization, none of that matters. I promise you, culture eats strategy for lunch. So my closing statement is just thank you for the opportunity to be here in this space. Thank you for connecting me to Dr. Barbara. She's never, ever going to get rid of me now. I might even move to Chicago. But these conversations are so critically important. So thank you for being courageous enough to have a forum like this today.
Well, thank you so much. Oh man, it's so much I want to say, but Dr. Barbara, any closing remarks for you?
I will simply answer gratitude. I am so excited to be among people who would decide that let's see, for you all, it's like 6:55. You know what I want to do at 6:55? I want to gather together with a bunch of people and think about and talk about DEI. Like that That's amazing. And I always want to be in a space where folks are up to that. This work is complicated. This work is complex, but this work is not harder than us. It is not harder than we can work to create something different that we have never seen or experienced before. None of us have lived a day outside of a system that is inequitable, but we can create the day where that's real and that's true. And I just want to be in the spaces where folks like you are coming together to think and talk about it. And I'm glad Tamika said that, because now I won't be stalking her when I try to like be in ongoing relationship. So great to meet you all. Thanks so much for having me, and endless gratitude for you being willing to take on this kind of work.
Amen, amen. And how about you, Dr. Spencer Kelly?
Oh, just,
Good to see you again.
again, I'm good to see you too, April. I'm just so grateful to be here and grateful that we can have this conversation. I learned so much tonight. If you could see all my notes. I was asking because I wanted information. Tell me about this because I want to poach it. I want to use it. I want to use your experience and your brains and your everything. It was fabulous. So thank you for letting me be a part of it. I truly appreciate it. Thank you.
You're welcome. And what a wonderful finale. This is our last speaker series before our spring and summer break. And what a wonderful way to end the year. But with your brilliance, man, I'm so inspired and I'm so grateful for you. I've taken notes too, but see, I was driving home and all I had was a Chase envelope. So I put all my notes on the envelope. But yes, I learned so much. I've been inspired further. Thank you so much, Tamika. Thank you, Dr. Barbara. Thank you, Karen. So this is what I wrote down. This is what stuck with me. That diversity, equity, inclusion is not something we do. It's who we are. It's who we should be. That really stuck with me. Also, so for companies to say, so that we check that off. No, we don't check it off. We check in. I love it. I love it. And then you said, this really got to me because I thought about my children and I thought about the children, and I want to talk to you more, Tamika, about Job Corps because I also work with Job Corps, but this really got to me that our children are brilliant. And what did you say? I'm gonna tell this to my daughter. Period, full stop.
Full
I love
stop.
that.
Period,
Period, full stop. I mean, period. There's nothing else to say. Period, full stop. And I just am so grateful again for you guys giving your time. And yes, this was the best ride home from work in a long time. Just, soaking in the brilliance, soaking in the energy. And it's just exactly what we need right when we need it. And I thank you so much. We are forever connected. And I thank you for joining us in this work. It takes all of us to ensure equity, diversity, and inclusion, justice, the whole nine. It takes all of us. And I'm glad that we have this team, this board, Mike. We actually started this Common Bonds because of diversity, equity, and inclusion. We started it because there was an issue with diversity, equity, and inclusion, and Mike jumped in. And so I am so grateful for this space. I'm so grateful for people like you guys, like Mike. And I can't wait till we join together again to talk about more things like this. Thank you so much. It was great just soaking in the brilliance of you ladies. And stay tuned for what's coming next. So this is our last speaker series for this term. We'll start back up sometime in September, but please stay tuned. We will, if you haven't signed up for the newsletter, sign up so that we can stay connected that way. But feel free to call, communicate, shoot us ideas, and without further ado, if there's nothing else, as we say in church, if all hearts and minds are clear, we will go get some dinner and relax for the evening. Thank you so much, everybody. It's good to see you. We'll see you soon.
Thank you,
Thank
everybody.
you. Bye,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.